Hey everyone, welcome back to the Metamodern Meeting podcast. Today I'm joined by two wonderful human beings with whom I had the privilege of spending some time recently at the last Metamodern Spirituality Lab. I'm speaking, of course, of Layman Pascal and Nick Headland. Nick was such a lovely host for us out there in California at Eudaimonia. We thought it'd be a great opportunity to all get together, do some kind of reflections on our experience, look ahead to what's happening in October here in Vermont. And otherwise, yeah, just it's always nice to have kind of an opportunity to, one, I think, like debrief and kind of talk amongst ourselves about our experiences, but also give people who maybe weren't there a little glimpse of the sorts of wonderful things we got up to. So I don't know. I don't know if anyone has a preference who wants to start. Maybe we'll start with you, Layman, just maybe to contextualize this a little bit more and kick us off.
Well, first of all, good to see you guys. It's weird to be around you like really intensely for a week and then not see you for a week. That's kind of sad. Thank you to Nick for getting up early and driving us to the airport. I'm actually kind of curious, and then we'll get to this later, maybe about like any residual effects from the final ceremony of working with the land and the bear tree that might be resounding for Nick. But yeah, we did a week. We did a special Metamodern Spirituality Lab in California at the Eudaimonia Institute. We've got another one coming up, the standard one in Vermont in October on Metamodern Love, but this one was on sacred ecology, eco spirituality. What are the intelligent and spiritually resonant and existentially potent dimensions of how human beings embody and relate to nature? There's so many smart people, such good energy, things that maybe worked, things that maybe didn't work in the California context, and like grounding ourselves into that land and making it vibrate so that if we go there again, which we probably will, it'll have this like sacred momentum to it. One of the things that is still really strongly with me was the conversation in the garden, where we talked about humility, human humility before natural complexity and intelligence, but also the necessity for human audacity as an extension of nature in ourselves, and the way in which the feeling frequency, the attunement that we call reverence, might be something that combines both the humility and the audacity. So for me, that's a conceptual and a spiritual aspect of what went on at this retreat that I'm still resonating with.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, go ahead, Nick. What's alive for you and was alive for you?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was the whole thing just really exceeded my expectations, and it was just, the field was incredible, and there's so many, like you said, Layman, so many heartfelt and incredibly intelligent humans there, and just a wonderful vibe of just community and friendship, and yeah, in response to your question about like the bear tree, and then we did this ritual at the end, and we all kind of blessed this chalice, and kind of all the energy that we've been cultivating all weekend sort of got channeled into this chalice, and then we put it inside this cave inside this bear tree, which is kind of in the heart of the land. And I have felt since then that there's something different on the land. Like it feels like it's more potentiated, more activated, and there's a subtle residue. I was down on the star deck where we built the mandala yesterday, and leaf blowing preparation for the next retreat, and the mandala was still there, and had the blower, which was interestingly called the ego blower. And I saw the mandala, and I just had a moment, a sacred moment with the ego blower right before I blew it all away. And just felt like that moment with the Tibetan mandalas, where you build this beautiful thing, and then you surrender it to reality. But yeah, it was amazing. And likewise, Layman, that conversation in the garden in Sparkleton Gardens, our organic veggie gardens, where we sat there and had just a really wonderful drop in with so many people. And some of those themes have been the ones that have stood out to me the most. And yeah, yeah, it seems like there's an emerging kind of cosmic groove, or I don't want to say consensus because I don't think we're quite there yet, but there's where the perspectives are resonating around a similar set of themes that has to do with exactly what you said, Layman. I like to call it like an asymmetrical unity. So there's this sense that in relation to the natural world from which we came, there's this sense of an I-thou relationship of deep humility, respecting its otherness as well. Respecting what Roy Bhaskar calls the ecological asymmetry, which is that, we came from this world, it preceded us, and we are dependent on it and not the other way around. And yet we're also called into this role of audacity, this role of being ecological and spiritual stewards of the ecology as a whole. Perhaps, because we have these logoic capacities, this metasystematic cognition, we can see across all the complexity of multiple systems and try and do our best to kind of tend these sort of wizards that tend these different flows. And but yeah, this notion of like honoring the unity and the differentiation at the same time. So yeah.
Yeah. Something that came up just now, one of my takeaways, it was a quick recollection. I was like, oh yeah, when we did that final ceremony there with that chalice and everything, people were putting a thing in. And one of the things I'd been sort of sitting with or kind of navigating around was sort of our sense of expectations. We've done a number of these labs in Vermont, and then you take something else, and then, how does that transfer or not, or how does a particular sort of emergent ritual come together or not? And we can build in a lot of sort of expectations that, either, kind of match what happens or not. And being able to like embrace whatever happens from a kind of sense of reverent appreciation as well was something I was sort of already playing around with in my head. And when we did that final ceremony and I went to put in my little thing into the chalice, it tumbles out. It didn't even make it in, and it falls out on the ground. And I thought, and just sort of like, yeah, like, and to fold into the ritual something in a sense that doesn't fold into the ritual was an interesting experience to have ritually enshrined in that moment, and was also kind of just instructive and interesting to me. So that was just something that came up.
Yeah, I appreciate that because that's part of my theory of how ritual operates. Like, I have this sense in which a ritual that you recognize obviously as being the ritual is sort of stagnant and defunct, right? It's only really a ritual when you're like, what is this? Is this a ritual? I don't know what the hell's happening right now. That enters into the liminal space where the sacred can actually be active. And it can be disruptions within the field. It can be things we set up for people to be in a sort of yes and no state of consciousness. But you have to be kind of in between your brain hemispheres and in between yourself and the world and in between yourself and the others. You have to be open to the peculiarity of it so that you can be there as an active, intentional agent folding in the complexity of what can't be predicted and what doesn't make sense. And to me, that's the living edge of ritual,
Mm.
And that one of the things that goes wrong in ordinary ritual is either we get too complacent, like the way our culture does Christmas, and it sort of loses all of its sacred value, or we react against that and we double down and we're like, we're all going to wear cloaks and we'll have fire and we're going to make it bigger and more intense, right? You push in too hard on the ritual is the other response. But the sensitive and I think archaically shamanic intelligence is to constantly find the weird space, and the weird space is definitely instantiated in odd things that aren't quite working that you have to keep folding in because you yourself are an agent at the edge of the ritual space.
Yeah, and one of the things that had just come up in that context was, I think, the discussion of serendipity. I think part of the story that Nick had told around the bear tree and all that was in that mix. And so, in some sense, that like synchronicity or serendipitous phenomenon, when something a bit uncanny kind of happens, it's this inbreaking through like the seam and the normal expectation that you're like, but to have that in a sense be part of the ritual container that is being set up for, and to weave in the weird serendipitous and synchronicitous things that come, and be able to appreciate that, almost kind of sacralize the weirdness of whatever that shows up, because you're engaging it in kind of a ritual field. If any of that makes sense, this is hard to explain because this is maybe something idiosyncratic, but
sacralize the weirdness of whatever shows up. That's a great slogan.
I love that. I think it also speaks to, the theme of sacred ecology and like the ways in which how is the human in relationship to this broader sphere of nature and reality and the sacred and this recognition that the natural world is something that's beyond our control and
Mm,
our dominion in a sense. And so, there's these things that are happening. We're building the mandala, and Kairos, the dog, is instantly deconstructing aspects of it in real time as we're building it. And okay, but that's part of it too. We're kind of dancing with that in a kind of in a jazzy way, an improvisational way, and so trying to find a call and response and a resonance and see it all as co-arising in a meaningful way.
yeah.
I mean, two things just popped up for me. One is how I think there was a lot of quasi consensus around a graduated spectrum of definitions of nature, like whether it's 0, 1, 2, 3 in the visionary realism sense, or it's a broader sort of everything that is real, including real potentials, and then all of the natural universe, and then the biosphere, and then this kind of selection within the biosphere of what we think is naturalistic thriving, that both human intelligence and machine intelligence could be active participants in clarifying and producing. Like, I think there was general agreement, both intellectually and emotionally, on a spectrum like that of definitions of the natural. So I want to put that aside as a philosophical highlight. And then I look at my own role and I think, I'm showing up in a couple of different ways, right? On the one hand, I'm playing a role where I'm like, okay, Layman's going to talk a lot and Layman's going to design a lot of this stuff and Layman's going to say yay or nay about a lot of this stuff. And in that role, I really appreciated the intensity of the meditations. I think coming together in that beautiful acorn pelted yurt was fantastic. The thickness and the strength of the group meditation sittings in the morning that I'm trying to actively be an energetic participant in. That was really strong in my role as guy in the field. But in my role as I'm just a human being in these spaces, the thing that I loved the most was, we went with Nick, Brendan, one night to dive in the river, a river that Brandon assures us is one of the best river sites in America. But the next day or a couple days later, I was down there and I was underwater wearing my hat, and I came up between the author of Integral Life Practice and the author of the Listening Society. And just as a human being, you're like, this is fucking cool. This is an elite hang. This is awesome.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you mentioned that too, because for me, also, kind of in the context of what we were talking about, these sort of liminal moments outside of expectation, because for me, one of the most beautiful experiences in the whole week that I was out there was being with you guys in the river. We all went and swam at night and just sitting in the water, looking up at the stars, feeling this deep sense of connection with people, with the land, with everything. It has a very transcendent experience, and these moments come that are just like these little touchstones, these little gems that you put on the altar of your life, and you're like, that's a very lovely, sacred moment. And it was sort of outside of regular time. It was things that just happen, right? And so again, I'm coming to this appreciation to circle back to this sacralizing the weirdness of whatever emerges. But those kinds of moments really stand out to me as being something very special that can come from these kinds of gatherings and get-togethers with folks that obviously you can't have if you're just online or in a Facebook group or commenting or something like that. So I just always circle back to how beautiful it is to be with people in this space and be with your friends and feel a deep sense of connection in a sacred way is just marvelous. So I'm glad you brought up some of that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm resonating with what you guys are both saying, and some of my favorite moments where, just lying in the Yuba River, deep diving, having some of the best philosophical conversations with you guys, and swimming in the moonlight, and it's just so precious to get to be together in a different way because we've both known each other for a while, but we mostly interact over Zoom or at conferences or whatever, and so mostly we know each other on an intellectual kind of level. So it's so lovely and precious to get to hang out, meditate, and like to feel the field that we got to create together in the mornings. And the field was really potent. It was really easy for me to go very deep, sitting with you guys, and that stands out as a highlight for me as well. But yeah, all the embodied things that we do, and just get to know each other and hang out and laugh and drink wine and all that is really precious.
Yeah. Any thoughts on Plunge Club, Layman, if I'm allowed to talk about Plunge Club?
Yeah. So yes, Plunge Club has rules, but they're not the same as the Fight Club rules. There's a thing we did, and I think it was the first time we did these in Vermont, right? That I've talked to you about this before, but Scout Wiley and I had a conversation about you, Brendan, and about the possibility of commenting to you. She was making comments about you, and I said, "Yeah, I kind of agree." I'm like, "We should tell them that." And I said, "Well, we should tell everybody. We should like
Mm.
have a thing where we just reflect our feelings about everybody back to each other as a kind of a game." And it became what we now call the Thursday Night Massacre. And we did one of these in California. But I really think that a lot of what the field is doing intersubjectively in these spaces is producing something that we could call improvisational games that can then be captured and used as functional organs of this process. And I think the same thing about Plunge Club, because we went over to Nick's place that he's in right now. Gorgeous, very interesting building. He's got a hot tub, he's got a cold plunge. And so we explored it, we talked about it, and later it started to sink into my consciousness that we had essentially outlined a really cool game, a metamodern game. So when we went back to Nick's house a few days later, we did this thing called Plunge Club. And in Plunge Club, a lot of various complicated things emerge, but basically, you have to go into the extremely cold water. And while you're in there, someone has been chosen to ask you a question. And that question can be extremely advanced, metamodern, second tier thinking, or it can be a really deep personal conundrum, question, exposure, vulnerability, or it can be both. But you have to answer it comprehensively while you are in the freezing cold water of the cold plunge. And then all of these other elements of it emerged after that. But fundamentally, I think that's an example of the emergence of improvisational games and the capture and the sacred use of those games, which is, I think, something that's quite unique to the Metamodern Spirituality Labs. I don't see that kind of production and capture being formalized in a lot of the other attempts at doing sacred field holding in these spaces.
Yeah. Yeah, that to me keeps returning as a something very special about this community and the vibe, the form of spirituality that shows up in these spaces, which is I'm increasingly realizing one of the few kinds that I can really passionately throw myself into and feel really held in. I think a lot of people know my story coming from a very kind of conservative religious background, having to work through a lot of those ideas and modalities and all that, and face kind of all that existential stuff. But just forms of religiosity or spirituality that are sort of on offer tend to have these flavors, and a lot of them, whether they're allergies or just legitimate things that I don't know, folks might respond to that just doesn't connect with them. There are a few places for me personally where I feel like I can show up with all of myself in terms of the full sense of intellect, the full sense of humor, the full sense of not taking oneself too seriously. And I feel like in a lot of these different spaces, one vibe tends to predominate over the other. It's either, entirely irreverent or entirely too reverent and too kind of ossified or stuck, or too kind of, oh, we're so open. And then it creates all sorts of challenges to just sort of, be comfortable while also engaging matters of sacrality, while also engaging heady conceptual content, while also being with friends. And so to have all that mixed together is like, that's a very special cluster of phenomena. And it's one of the reasons why I just keep coming back.
Well, I'd like to speak to that a little bit because yes, there's a balance of all these things, right? And the reverent, the irreverent, the sacred, the humorous, all of those things. But that's a subset of this general attempt that I see as so important of getting the balances right. Like it's like we're making a stew, right? You got to like blend the things appropriately. And one of the things that really stood out to me about the Eudaimonia property is how helpful it was in that regard. Because very often I'm thinking, how do we get the right balance of physical, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual efforts that people have to undergo? And people don't necessarily want to undergo efforts, but you got to put these in front of them, and they have to be roughly balanced. And the fact that this property is so up and down, right, that you're getting a huge calf and thigh workout whenever you have to go up a hill, move something around, um, that the physical exercise element is taken care of automatically by the landscape at Eudaimonia. So I don't have to worry about that one too much, right? I can say, like, how do we match that with some emotional disturbance and some deep intellectualism and some spiritual vibes? But I really appreciated the contribution of the landscape in terms of giving everyone some basic physical grounding and exercise while we're doing all these other things, because that's essential.
Yeah. Any other thoughts, Nick, especially about being the steward of that incredible land and knowing it so well? And what was it like, interfacing with all this stuff in that space for you? And anything come out of that gave you any ideas or felt like, I don't know, was there anything that generated anything for you in terms of bringing these two things together?
Mm. Well, it was really meaningful for me to get to share the cosmopolitan localism project that we've been working on there. And I felt like, that was sort of feeding into the knowledge sharing aspect of the cosmopolitan localism, feeding back the learnings that we've garnered there over the past years back into the kind of knowledge commons. And yeah, it just felt really powerful to get to share all that and sort of be seen in everything that we've done there, and it felt like I'd love to do more of that. Like maybe next time we do something like this, we could actually have a day where we can do some of the permaculture projects and go deeper with that and get our hands dirty. So that was one thought that occurred to me, and yeah, I mean, it was just really this was the perfect kind of inaugural event for Eudaimonia Institute. I mean, yeah, sacred ecology is kind of the theme of my life. So it was just really perfect in that way. And yeah, I mean, and to back up also and just reflect on what you guys were talking about in terms of the balance, I absolutely loved how we did that throughout. There was that one exercise we did where Matt Segal was sharing about his own awakening to the natural world and very very deep and rich and vulnerable and eloquent share. And at the same time, we were all invited to be moving in our bodies, doing some sort of exercise or yoga or dance or movement. 30% focus on the body, 30% focus on what Matt was saying or what the speaker was saying, and then 30% focus on like the heart and kind of this positive sense of affect and appreciation for the natural world. And that was just so powerful. And I feel like we should be doing more of those practices like all the time, instead of putting in all our focus on just what the intellectual exchange is. So that really was something that was really powerful for me and something that I want to weave into my teaching and so on moving forward. And of course, it only adds up to 90%. So there was 10% for miracles and surprises.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, actually, well, go ahead, Layman. Were you gonna say something?
No, I loved that. That was I mean, I think that's an extension of my work with the Gurdjieffian approach, and I'm hoping we do it at a lot of the MSLs going forward. I wanted to say to anybody who's listening or watching that I mean, this is an elite international hangout, but it's not just white guys, spiritual intellectuals. There were indeed some women and black guys, or at least one black guy, and he was awesome. But you don't have to be exactly like us to be there, right? If you want to make pakoras or play music or dance or just hang out in the hot tub or go to the river or play with the dog, all those other things are part of this. Like this is a kind of elite event, but elite doesn't just mean prominence or intellectual or something like that, right? Anybody who's attuned to the feeling frequencies and the cultural shift that we're talking about, in my mind, that's who the elite is that can be part of this. And in terms of other factors that still come up for me, I think I sent this to you, Brendan, when I was on the way there at the airport. My attempt to start clarifying the differences between cosmoerotic humanism and what a metamodern eco-cosmic humanism. And I feel like that's part of the field of this event, beginning to speak itself in me to like make those distinctions a little bit more clear.
Mm.
I was really impressed by Nick showing us the divots in the stone that represented ancient people turning the acorns into flour, because one of the things I thought was more present at Eudaimonia than normally in Vermont was the sense of real ancestors in that place who
Mm.
had been active there in the land. I love the Ganesh. I think that's a really sacred, protective thing. And I also wanted to touch on the musicality, right? There's a musical thing to California in general, but Nick's sing along was fantastic, and Brandon's Gordon Lightfoot song analysis was fantastic. And I think the future of doing this in California has a really deep and powerful musicality to it.
Yeah. Gosh. Well, I mean, I both don't know what else to add, and also we could keep going on this for hours. But this feels like a good taste or glimpse, depending on what sensory metaphor you want to use, for yeah, folks getting a sense of what the hell we got up to and what these kinds of things are about. I'm really looking forward to continuing this back here in Vermont in October. We're doing our fall Metamodern Spirituality Lab.
And
Uh,
what can you tell us about that, Brendan?
um, Nothing, actually, nothing. So goodbye, everyone. No, what we're going to be doing is looking at metamodern love, exploring love in its myriad forms, from friendship to bhakti, devotion to eros to philia to the whole gamut um, of that coherent emotion and also orientation, and unpack that through discussion from a metamodern lens, but also explore practices. And when I say explore practices around metamodern love, no, this is not a another sex cult in the scene. So sorry to disappoint anyone, but you actually would have much more to say about this, I assume, Layman, because I know you've been giving a lot of thought to this, and so I don't know if there's additional things you want to add.
Well, silly things, we had been calling it love, etc., to like frame it in a metamodern way, but my partner was insistent we call it metamodern love, which reminded me of Bowie's Modern Love, which I loved as a kid. And I'll tell you, the weirdest part of that song for me is always he says, I catch the paper boy, but things don't really change. And whenever I heard that, I thought, why did he think things would change if he caught the paper boy?
Hmm.
Like that was always an open question for me as a child. But yeah, there's a sensibility about love that we need to tap into that is both balanced and spectrum like, right? The spectrum includes family love, love for your children, includes romantic love, it includes brotherhood, it includes the physiology of coherent emotion, it includes how do we as a postmodern and trans rational community hold ideas like love is the fundamental driver of cosmic evolution, right? Obviously we can't just naively believe that, but also it's pretty close to how we feel about things. So how do we hold that in an interesting way, but also how do we bring forward love in a way that doesn't get quarantined into this new age, superficial, vapid assertion of love, or quarantined into this, let's say, Gaffney Aubrey Marcus sort of overly eroticized, highly dubious kind of love, even though we have some interesting connections to those people. How do we make a richer, deeper, more sensitive, but fully engaged, fully vibrant, fully exciting, fully fiery kind of experience of love? What does it mean to us as beings? How do we bring our idealism and our skepticism? How do we get a sincere irony approach on all of that stuff? How do we take love really seriously in all its dimensions and yet not fall into simple, naive metaphysics around love that have not served the transformational, metaphysical, and spiritual attempts of the past?
Yeah, well, and that's just Layman off the cuff, riffing on what we'll talk about. So you can imagine how great it's going to be when we dive into this here. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to that, and looking forward to continuing these wonderful events. It's been and continues to be an honor working with you, Layman, on these, and thank you so much, Nick, again for opening your space and doing this inaugural Eudaimonia Institute event with the Metamodern Lab. Yeah, any final things we want to bring into this conversation before we wrap it up?
I just want to say to Nick, pass our love to both Kendall and Kairos.
Will do. Yeah. Yeah. It was such a pleasure, guys. Such a joy. And I'd love to do it again. And also feel like there's a lot of threads around the philosophical inquiries that I'd love to follow up on and keep weaving together. So, yeah, total joy and honor to work with you guys. And
Yeah, maybe we want to. I mean, we're all over tasked in a lot of ways, but some way of bringing together what we feel are the conclusions of the event that we harvested from each other and from the collective could be really useful at some point.
Yeah, I
yeah.
agree. In fact, that could be just kind of good practice always, each time, each iteration, kind of this, and this reflections part of that to surface those things, and stir that all up and then, sift through that and see what emerges from that. And yeah, I think that can help create a sense of deepening into these increasingly lovely grooves or traditions that are showing up and emerging from continually returning to this as something that adds this real sense of depth and a lovely sense of a almost a heritage of things that we're building up in a kind of treasury, which is very special. But now I'm sounding all sappy, so we should probably cut it off there. Thank you guys. This has been great. I appreciate it. It's lovely to see you again. And yeah, keep an eye out for the October event. I'll post some things and people who are interested can sign up for that. And it's less than 5 weeks away. So I'd love to see folks out here for that. But anyway, thank you both. Till next time, my dear friends.
Thanks so
Love you
much.
guys.